Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, we're going to talk about the Timberwolves' biggest issue so far this season, and that is transition, mostly defense, but also offense. The Wolves are giving up a ton of points in transition this year. We'll talk about that. Plus, some early look at rotation numbers, on-off numbers when Randle's on the floor and Ant's off the floor. How does that staggering in minutes look to this point? And also, Chris Finch unveiled Randle at the 5 toward the end of the game the other night. We'll talk about what that looked like and could we see more of it moving forward. It's all coming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Happy Thursday, everybody. We are still a day away from the next Wolves game. They're on this 2 days off, 1 day on schedule this week, I guess, until Saturday when they play a back-to-back Friday to Saturday. But no Wolves game until Friday night. Today, I want to dig into a bit of like one bigger picture issue to this point in the season, and then I want to spend the rest of the time talking about rotations, lineup pairings, and what that could potentially look like here in the near future. So we'll get into all that here in just a moment. A big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. A reminder about the newsletter, too. The Locked On Wolves daily newsletter. It's one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free right now at lockedondaily.com. That's lockedondaily.com. Start your day with the all-new free Locked On Wolves newsletter. It gets sent out each day, Monday through Friday, with like basically the highlights of the show. So you can read it in text form. You can also catch up on stuff you missed. There's some national articles in there. It's a really good resource. So be sure to subscribe to that. Again, lockedondaily.com. All right. The last like week or so, I obviously I don't know, the last 3 or 4 days, my voice has been getting better. So like a week ago, I was apologizing for my voice. We're getting close to back to normal. Still a little weird, but at least it's not like gravelly. But right now there's a lot of thunder happening in the background. So if there's like rumbling and stuff, it's the thunder. So, other noises to look out for, I guess, besides me just apologizing. There's the thunder right now. Besides me just apologizing for my voice on today's show. All right. So I want to talk about transition first. If you listen to the Minnesota Basketball Party show, which was the last show in the audio feed, if you are listening, whatever audio platform, the episode before this is the Minnesota Basketball Party. It posted on Wednesday afternoon. That's a show we do every Wednesday morning live on YouTube at 9-ish, give or take, a.m. And it's myself. It's Ron Johnson for the Ron Johnson Show, Jack Borman, who hosts the Postcast with Luke Idman, and formerly the editor-in-chief of Catus Hoopus, and Reggie Wilson, the sports anchor from Care 11, hosted by Sam Ekstrom. We spent some time talking on this week's show about the transition issues, and like it's really at the forefront of the conversation around the Wolves now because of all the problems they had against Dallas. And so much of that was spurred on by the turnovers. I talked a lot about this on Wednesday's show and on the Basketball Party. The Wolves turned it over 20 times against Dallas. They gave up, I think, 25 fast break points to Dallas, but it was also the secondary break that was an issue. And those points aren't all chalked up to fast break points for Dallas, but they're, second points scored in the secondary break, with, 12, 14 seconds of the shot clock, a lot of times come out of these turnover situations, out of these open floor situations where the transition defense is just straight up poor. However, if you take a step back further and look at 4 games so far for Minnesota coming into play Wednesday, there was an 11, 12 game slate in the NBA Wednesday, but I'm recording this before those games are all over, looking at cleaning the glass through the first, 8 days of the season, through 4 Timberwolves games. Minnesota ranks dead last in the league in transition rate defensively. 22% of opponent possessions start in transition. That's not just straight up fast break points, because actually fast break points aren't horrible. Minnesota's actually, like, if you look at this, the frequency that they're allowing transition is worst. But the points that they're allowing per 100 transition plays or points per possession transition actually isn't that bad of a mark. And my theory on that, I think it's actually partly because in some of these situations they're getting back, but they're getting cross-matched or they're getting mixed up, lost in the wash, if you will, and they're not getting matched up. So it's the secondary break that's killing them in some of these situations. So those don't necessarily count as transition points, but the possession started with a transition opportunity and ultimately still leads to points, even if they aren't chalked up as fast break points in air quotes, at the box score at the end of the day on NBA.com or ESPN.com. Now, the frequency of allowing transition is a problem. Being dead last, 22% of opponent possession starting with transition opportunities. They're dead last in allowing transition off of live rebounds. 43% of the time that an opponent gets a rebound, the Wolves allow a transition possession. And they're second to last in transition off of steals. That's really, really bad. Now, schematically, I don't know that a whole lot has changed in terms of what the Wolves are trying to do. I know Karl-Anthony Towns, he actually, for being as bad as he was for so much of his career, getting back defensively, and I think he was. Part of it was the complaining to officials. Part of it was falling down a lot. I thought last year he was better. He also spent a lot of time on the perimeter on offense last year, not playing the 5. So it allowed him to get back. He was, 10, 12, 14 feet closer to midcourt. It was easier for him to get back. And the Wolves were very cognizant. Chris Finch was very cognizant of the struggles 2 years ago with this team in transition. The 22-23 Wolves were miserable at transition defense. And last year there was a concerted effort for the Wolves to get back in transition to try and not end up with those same old issues. And it did a great job. They're one of the best teams in the league at it. In fact, let me just pull the number. I know that they're one of the best teams, but I might as well get the exact number for you. I got it right here on Cleaning the Glass. Last season, the Timberwolves' defensive transition frequency, they were 8th best in the league. Opponents ran only 13.7% of the time in transition against the Wolves, and they were 4th in points plus per 100, points added per 100 possessions and points per 100 plays. 4th in the league and 8th in frequency. This season, they're dead last in frequency, and they're 9th in points added per 100 possessions. So, now, again, obviously, everything I'm talking about right now, we only have 4 games worth of a sample size. 2 games at home, 2 games on the road. 3 likely playoff or at least play in opponents in Sacramento, the Lakers. I don't know, we called Sacramento the Lakers both likely, but probable, I guess. I don't know. It's the same word, basically. And obviously a difficult opponent in Dallas. So lots of caveats apply here. I get it. But this is the data we have to go off of. And again, schematically, I don't think they're trying to do anything differently. I think Randle's has struggled in transition. We talked about this on the basketball party on Wednesday. I think he struggled in transition. I think Cat was really good in transition last year. I think that's part of it. I think there's also an element of, hey, it's a bit of a conference finals hangover. It's probably not a real thing, but it is for this Wolves team, I believe. I think it's going to take a second for them to lock back in defensively. Rudy Gobert's another one. I don't think he's been super locked in defensively either. So I'm not at all pinning this on Randle. I think it's a variety of factors, but it's something that's got to get cleaned up. And then quickly, on the flip side, offensive transition hasn't been good for the Wolves either. And I know they didn't run last year, but something I talked about quite a bit this offseason was, hey, when Rudy's off the floor, why shouldn't the Wolves run a little bit more? And they're third to last. They're 28th in the league in offensive transition frequency right now, 11.8% of the time, ahead of only the Knicks and the Hornets. And when they run, they're not successful. They're 26th in points added per 100 possessions. They're not running still off of rebounds. They're 27th running off rebounds, 23rd in running off steals. So they're giving up that gap in opportunities they're refusing to take on offense and opportunities that opponents are taking, liberally from the Wolves on the other end of the floor. That's a big kind of chasm there that the Wolves are dealing with that they have to try and overcome in other areas. And they nearly did it against Dallas, right? Because of the 3-point shooting, the free throw attempts. Overall, they shot the ball well from the floor, but the turnovers were too great. and the points given up in transition was just too much. So that's an area that should and can get cleaned up relatively quickly. Now, they're going to be playing teams like, let's see, San Antonio right now is 21st in a fast break frequency. Denver is much higher than that. Denver is, oh, I'm sorry, I thought they're 19th. So they're both pretty middle of the pack in terms of how frequently they run an offense. But we saw this last year. Even teams, especially 2 years ago, even teams that don't frequently run themselves will get up for a team that they know doesn't get back in transition. And that was the story of the 22-23 Wolves, was the teams that were dead last in pace were running against the Wolves because they knew they could. Hopefully that book isn't the book that gets out on the Wolves this year, and it's something they can remedy here relatively quickly. I want to spend the rest of the time talking rotations. Let's dive into some of the Julius Randle stuff. Again, just 4 games worth of data, but there's some interesting stuff to get into here in just a moment. We'll do that next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. When you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Of course, Thursday Night Football tonight. The New York Jets are once again on a primetime game. I believe they're 2-6 right now. They are home for the Texans, and believe it or not, they are favored by 1.5. I know Stephon Diggs is out for the season with the ACL, but I don't know. Like the Texans, to me, at the Jets, I don't know. I wouldn't mind taking Texans plus 1.5 on the road, or at that point, maybe you just take Texans money line plus 110 on the road against the Jets. Like that, it feels like that New York crowd, perhaps they, I don't know, perhaps they turn on the Jets, depending on how things get kicked off in that game, how Aaron Rodgers plays, how those around Aaron Rodgers play. That to me is an interesting one. Of course, there's a full slate of games on Sunday as well. The Vikings are, they are one of the late games. Lions, Packers, and Vikings, Colts are late. The only 2 like 3:30 Sunday games. There's a couple at 3, but those are really compelling games happening at the same time on Sunday. So check those out at FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right. Let's talk about some rotation-related items here. Number one of the things I was most encouraged to see, or excited to see, and I thought would be encouraged by, is the opportunity for the Wolves to stagger Julius Randle and Anthony Edwards in the rotation. And certainly there's concerns about how they would play together, how the spacing would work. Would this be a my turn, your turn isolation offense? To this point, that hasn't really been a major issue. I talked about that on Wednesday. I think it's actually been handled pretty well. Sitting here right now, we do not have enough of a sample of these guys staggering their minutes and not being on the court, or one being on the court without the other. So, for instance, Julius Randle's only played 24 possessions on the court without Anthony Edwards, and they have not gone well. Wolves are a negative 23.2, which is the 0th percentile, according to Cleaning the Glass. I don't think I've ever seen that before. Defensively, in those 24 possessions, they've given up 156.5 points per 100 possessions played, is how that plays out. Offensively, they've been 97th percentile, very good, but so bad defensively that it's a negative 23.2 for Randle with no Ant minutes. Now, if you flip it and you go Ant with no Randle, it's only a slightly larger sample. So it goes from 24 possessions to 63 possessions. And those lineups, Ant, no Randle, are a -5. So not as bad as the -23, but still a -5. And you flip it. Weirdly enough, Ant lineups with no Julius Randle are 87th percentile defensively and just 2nd percentile offensively. So Randle, no Ant, was good offensively and bad defensively. Ant, no Randle is good defensively and bad offensively. Painfully small sample sizes. Like combined, it's a total of like 90 possessions total 87 possessions total, something like that. Of these guys, one of them on the floor without the other. So it's not nearly enough to be able to kind of glean any sort of information from it. But it's something I want to keep an eye on here moving forward. And so I wanted to point it out that like we haven't seen a ton of it, but here we are. Now, the other Julius Randle related thing I wanted to hit on is Julius Randle at the 5. And this is something that both myself and Jack Borman talked about on the basketball party on Wednesday. But we hadn't seen it in the first three games and 3 quarters of the season. In the fourth quarter of the Dallas game, the Wolves decided to go with this. This was Rudy exits the game at the 9:19 mark in the fourth quarter with the Wolves down by 10. He comes back in the game at the 3:42 mark. So they basically play 6 minutes without him, and they're down 5. So they're a +5 in the minutes with Julius Randle at the 5. They're a +5. Cleaning the glass, if you plug in Randle at the 5 minutes, the Wolves are a +85.7 across those 7 possessions, all happening, of course, in this game against the Mavs. The lineup for most of that time was Ant, DiVincenzo, Alexander Walker, McDaniels, and Randle, and then Conley came in for Ant for a couple of possessions. But these teams were poor defensively, but they were off the charts offensively. And we could go blow by blow even here. And just like after Rudy exits the game, the Wolves, the Wolves force a turnover. They miss a 3. The Mavs get a tip in, and then Conley comes down and gets fouled. Next time down the floor, Nickeil Alexander-Walker makes a 3-pointer. Next time down the floor, McDaniels hits a 3-pointer. And then they just trade buckets with the Mavs here, back and forth. Alexander Walker makes another 3. Ant hits a shot. Alexander Walker hits a shot. So the Wolves scored on how many straight possessions was this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, actually 8 straight possessions they scored on. I take that back. 9 straight they scored on every single possession except the first one with Julius Randle at the 5, and none of it was Julius Randle. Now, Julius Randle played extremely well in this game as a ball mover, and obviously Randle at the 5 to be successful doesn't just mean Randle's scoring. It means that you're making the Mavs all defend guys that maybe they're not as comfortable defending, and it just shuffles everything the opponent is trying to do. And Dallas, wants to play big, and I get it. The Wolves should also want to play big. They have, multiple bigs between Rudy and also, by the way, these lineups all had McDaniels at the 4. They did not have Nas at the 4 either. And that's something to keep an eye on. So you have Rudy, Nas, and Randle's the only big on the floor, and this team is off the charts offensively. It's a painfully small sample size. But it's something I think we'll see a bit more of moving forward depending on opponents, and it's a look that Chris Finch now has the option to go to. So even if it was only 7 possessions, they scored on on the final 7 of those possessions. I think the way that it works on cleaning the glass, it takes out. I don't think that 7 possession number matches up exactly with the play-by-play, but that's what that was. They scored on essentially 7 of 8 possessions in the fourth quarter with Randle at the 5. So that's something I think it's a tool in their toolbox that I think they're going to start using a bit more of here moving forward. And it's certainly something to keep an eye on. Randle's driving kick game in this game was awesome. He has actually, this was another fun nugget that came out of Wednesday. Julius Randle leads the team in assists right now through 4 games. He's got, total assists. He's got 20 assists. Mike Conley has 18. Anthony Edwards has 14. And at the same time, it's not like Julius isn't shooting the basketball. He's still got a 24% usage rate, second on the team to Ant. So just when the offense runs through Julius Randle, to this point, it's been very good. And I referenced the transition defense issues early. Clearly there's been defensive problems. He has not been as good defensively as Cat was last season. But the offense has been really off the charts for Julius Randle. The decision-making, the passing, the shooting when he does get shots up on the rim. That's all looked very good for Julius Randle. All right. I want to close by talking a bit bigger picture about the rotation itself. They've only 9 guys have seen the floor through the first 4 games. I'll talk about my thoughts on that and, who might be the next person to crack the rotation here. Is it game 5? Is it game 6? Is it sometime in the near future? We'll talk about all that here next. So the Timberwolves to this point in the season really only have an 8-man rotation plus 5-ish minutes for Joe Ingles. He's averaged how many minutes per game? 5 point. So many small numbers next to Joe Ingles' name. 5.5 minutes per game through 4 games. Everybody else, the top 8 guys are all averaging at least 21.8 minutes. 6 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago was actually about when Cat was traded. Let's do that. Let's say 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago, whatever. I thought this was a 9-man rotation that included Joe Ingles. This was before DiVincenzo was on the team, so I thought, hey, 9-man rotation. And, guy number 8 was Joe Ingles, and then I thought Terrence Shannon Jr. / Rob Dillingham. That's kind of how this rotation is going to shake out. As soon as Dante DiVincenzo was acquired, and Randle, of course, for Towns, the rotation didn't need to go deeper than 8. And Joe Ingles was number 9, which bumps, DiVincenzo bumped Rob Dillingham out of the rotation. And there's a bit of clamoring out there from Wolves fans like, hey, they're struggling at times offensively. They need some punch. Why not play the guy you drafted 8th overall? In fact, the day after opening night, I had a buddy who's not a Timberwolves fan, but watched the game and kind of tangentially, like surface level, pays attention to the Wolves. And he asked me, hey, is there any concern that Dillingham was drafted 8th and he didn't play? And I was like, no, it was game 1. They're a conference finals team that traded up to take a guy in the lottery. Like, it's not exactly, hopefully ever is anything like Victory Cigar, Darko Milicic and the Pistons, right? But this is a good team that got to draft as if they were a bad team because they traded up. So now that they don't, it's a luxury to not need Rob Dillingham this early in the season. And there are some teams like the Thunder's experimenting with their lineups more than the Wolves. Like, you look at what OKC's done so far this season. They're playing around with their lineups, trying to see what they have. But my take on that is, like, no matter what you do, it's a small sample. And like, obviously the eye test can tell you, like, okay, we like this and we don't like that. We can get it on film. But the actual data you're going to get from it is still so limited that I actually kind of buy what Chris Finch is doing. Now, he may go and play 11 guys on Friday and completely blow this theory out of the water. I don't think that'll happen. But I think that the thought process here is, and I said something similar to this toward the end of the basketball party on Wednesday. Like, we know these are our top 8 guys. And if the playoffs, like, no matter what happens, barring a season-ending injury to anybody that's in the top 8, these are the 8 guys that are going to play in the playoffs. This is our playoff rotation. Rob Dillingham is a regular season. He's going to need to contribute as a regular season depth piece, as will Josh Minott, as will Terrence Shannon Jr., and to an extent, Joe Ingles. But in the playoffs in 2025, next April and May, those guys, no matter what, barring a catastrophic injury, devastating injury, those guys are not going to be key to the Timberwolves winning the finals. It's very, very, very unlikely. They will be huge a year from now. Mike Conley retires, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, or Naz Reid, or Julius Randle, any combination of those guys leaves in free agency. Then, yeah, you need TJ Shannon. You need Rob Dillingham. You might need Josh Minott. So the idea is they're depth pieces that eventually in the regular season will play because of resting Conley in a back-to-back, Gobert tweaking something, whatever might happen. But you don't need them in games 2, 3, 4 because you just don't. They're not your top 8 guys. Over the course of the year, they're going to get enough opportunities that they're going to be in a place to help you along the course of the season. And then you may need them next fall and you feel much better about it because you've seen them on an NBA basketball court in a, in a big spot, at least a regular season spot. But playing Rob Dillingham right now, what's that going to do for you? He's not going to be a more efficient or a better scorer than, say, Naz Reid, or, he's not going to play the Nickeil Alexander-Walker role like Nickeil Alexander-Walker does. He's certainly not going to help your turnover problems. The Wolves are 4th to last, 5th to last in the league in turnover rate as an offense. Playing a 164-pound 19-year-old is not going to help you with that. I just don't. There's no reason to rush these guys out there. Now, I say that, and they have a back-to-back. Home Friday night, road Saturday in San Antonio. Could we see any of these guys in one of those games? Probably. I would, if I had to, like, yes or no, if I had to place a bet, if FanDuel had a bet for, will the Wolves play a 10th player, a guy who hasn't played yet this regular season, either Friday or Saturday, I would say yes. I think the first back-to-back is the right time to break it out. Maybe the Spurs game Saturday, which, especially if you win Friday against Denver, you figure, hey, we should win against the Spurs. Let's give Josh Minott 6 minutes. Let's get Dillingham. Let's get his feet wet. I think that's perfectly reasonable, and I would bet on it happening if I had to bet on it. That said, I don't think anybody else becomes a permanent member of this rotation in short order. I think that it's an in-season kind of shift based on how things are going, based on matchups, based on rest, based on guys being, tweaking stuff and being banged up. And Conley talked about his wrist before the game the other day, or his hand. All these things are factors that are going to play into it. But in my mind, Josh Minott should be next man up, not even Rob Dillingham. I think the Minott role, energy, rebounding, paint protection, perimeter defense, switchability, flexibility on defense. Those are all traits that Josh Minott brings to the table. And I think he's earned the right to, maybe it's the Joe Ingles minutes. If Finch doesn't want to go past 9 guys, or maybe it's just spelling, if Jaden McDaniels gets into foul trouble in one of these games, give the opportunity to Josh Minott. I think that might make a lot of sense. But at any rate, I'm not, don't put me in the category of people clamoring for a Rob Dillingham debut just for the sake of doing it, because this team's only 2-2. They've lost to a couple of good teams, and they could easily be 4-0. They could be 1-3. Like, there's so much noise here early in the season that I'm not up in arms about any of this stuff. And again, I'll reiterate what I said about the Dallas game on Wednesday's show. They turned it over 20 times, but they outshot Dallas everywhere on the floor. They out-assisted Dallas. Like, there's a lot of reasons they could have still won this game. So, it's all fixable stuff. Even if it is some stuff that they struggled with last year, it's fixable. As I mentioned, the Wolves have Denver on Friday night. It's an 8:30 p.m. tip on ESPN. I'll actually be hosting the postcast with Jack Borman. So follow along for that. The audio will be here on the feed on Friday night, but you can watch live on YouTube. So myself and Jack will go live, give or take, I don't know what, 11:30-ish, 11:15, 11:30 Central on Friday night. I'll still have a show between now and then. We'll do a Friday show previewing the Denver matchup, hitting a couple more things too. And then Saturday, the Wolves are at San Antonio. It's a 7 p.m. tip. And then they're off Sunday. They play Monday. And then 2 more off days next week. They're off election night next Tuesday. They're off Wednesday. And then they're in Chicago next Thursday. So they do the 3 games in 4 days thing and then get 2 days off again, which is nice. So anyway, that's all we got for you today here on the show. Of course, the Locked On Wolves show can be found anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app, on Roku and Amazon Fire TV, and you can watch on YouTube. You can also follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves, and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. A reminder of the brand new podcast, the newsletter for the Locked On Wolves podcast. It's one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com. Start your day with the all-new free Locked On Wolves newsletter. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. The Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. We'll be back on Friday with another show, then Friday night with the live postcast. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.